Hello, and I hope you've been enjoying the chapters I've uploaded. I put a lot of time and effort into them. Show your appreciation by commenting and liking the page to help my algorithm scores. Also hit that subscribe and notification to get my videos as soon as they're released. Thank you, I appreciate your help, and God bless.
Chapter 15. One Crazy Mother. "What are you doing?" Uriah asks me. "I know that energy anywhere," I replied. "I don't know how, but that's Sai. She's in no shape to be fighting." He shook his head as I reached for my medallion. "That may be true, but you don't know if that thing will work. What if you end up on the other side of the universe, little Eli?" he warned. "Then I keep trying until I get to them," I replied defiantly. "Or you get trapped somewhere and can't find your way back," he shot in an angry tone. "Wart!" Before he could finish his sentence, I was through the portal. The smell of the air on the other side of the portal smelled like burnt grass and cement. I stared around, recognizing the scenery immediately from my time in the advising booth. I was in the right place. "Watch out!" I heard a voice say. Kaboom! An explosion erupted that sent Sai flying through the air. I grabbed her and Pete just in the nick of time and dove behind a nearby barn. The explosion was like nothing I had ever seen. The shot obliterated the entire landscape. It was like a meteorite had hit the grounds. "What in the world is that?" I replied, looking back. "Trouble," said a voice to my far right. I turned to see Sean standing on top of the barn, staring across the field. I wasn't surprised to see him there. I was more wondering if he was there as a friend or foe. "Sean, when did you get here?" I replied, staring up at him. "I was trying to save your friend before your other friend, intervened," he replied, spitting blood. I paused as my heart began to beat out of my chest. I was worried, but all I felt at that moment was exuberance. The day Sai saw me after my day was vivid in that moment. I couldn't imagine her feeling any different than what I was feeling at that moment. "Sorry," Sai replied, catching my attention. "I didn't know. I just saw you going toward Pete and Sorry." She moved to make a joke, but before she could, I threw my arms around her, squeezing her. "Tim, you're crushing me," she responded, causing me to release her, gun-shy. She chuckled, showcasing a smile that I lost myself in. She was my better half, and I couldn't believe I had her back. The feeling was unreal. "Just joking," she shot, ignoring the imminent danger behind her. We joked like we weren't in the middle of a war zone. Sean looked at us like we were out of our minds. He sympathized with what we were feeling in that moment, but he understood the danger we were facing better than we did. He stood paranoid as we continued our reunion, ignoring everything around us. "You want to explain?" I responded, unable to stop staring at her. She chuckled, blushing, as I repeated my earlier actions, scooping the girl up in a bear hug once again. She stared into my eyes lovingly, before bashfully averting eyes. I couldn't fight the feelings I had for her. I sat her down before placing my hand on her shoulders and pressing my forehead against hers lovingly. She teared up, placing her hand on my cheek. "Don't ever do that to me again," I responded, mimicking her words to me a month earlier. She chuckled once again. She was overwhelmed and flattered by my reception. I moved forward, placing a loving kiss on her cheek, but she didn't mimic my action from a month before. Instead of recoiling in shock, she rubbed the spot where I kissed her, staring into my eye, unapologetically smitten. I expected her reaction to mimic mine. The awkward pause caused me to sputter. A lot better than a punch to the gut, I'd wager, I shot awkwardly, placing my hands in my pockets, bashfully staring at the ground. She took a deep breath before forcing my eyes to meet hers. Tim, I promised myself that once I could talk to you again, she paused, causing me to slightly raise my brow confused as she fumbled to find the words to encapsulate what she was feeling. I wouldn't... Tim, Sean dropped down next to us with a thud, cutting her off as she grimaced in frustration at the boy's interruption. Sorry to interrupt you guys. I know this is a big deal considering Sai's situation, but you have to be quiet, Sean replied. Do you feel that? The building shielded us from the direct contact with the energy, so it took a second for it to hit me. But from the minute we locked onto it, Sai and I dropped to a knee. It was a powerful and foul smell that seemed to tear our insides apart like toxic gas. Sean helped us up and leaned us against the nearby wall as we both struggled to breathe. What is that? Sai replied, breathing heavily. It's so powerful. Sean peeked around the corner before turning back to us. It'll take a second for the effects to wear off, but the first contact with it is brutal, he replied, helping us to our feet. Pete was still unconscious. I shook him, trying to wake him from his state, but he was unresponsive. What happened to him? I replied, checking his pulse. She happened, Sean replied, pointing in a general direction. I tried to deflect the shot, but Sai knocked me off the path. It was a phantom punch. The blow caught him full contact. There was nothing I could do. He'll come around, but it might take a while. I nodded, afraid to ask the most pressing question. Who hit him? Sai intervened angrily. Venus, he replied, once again pointing in a general direction. His words immediately put me on alert. I looked around and saw what looked to be a burning star. It slowly settled as the burning flame slowly formed into a human form. Aeneas, my son, she replied, falling to one knee. What have they done to you? She looked distraught. She hung her head, sobbing, unable to control her emotions. She was a classically beautiful woman. She had long red hair and wore beautifully black and gold classical Roman armor. She carried a long sword that was as big as her whole body. My son, she mourned through sobs. Zoom! Thud! We continued to cower behind the barn as another individual shot across the sky and landed hard on the ground with a loud implosion. Mother, he replied, running to her side. He looked more feminine than Aeneas. He wore a bow and arrow pack over his shoulder and Greco-Roman armor like his mother. He ran to her, apologetically dropping to his knees as he spoke. Eros? She grunted in an agitated warning tone that was barely above a whisper. The vibration of her words caused the whole area to tremble violently. We all dove to safety as the barn crumbled from the impact, almost crushing us in the process. Mother, I'm sorry. I had a powerful prospect on my tail. I couldn't shake him. I swear, I couldn't get here, he pleaded. Smack! She smacked him with a backhand that nearly knocked his block off. He flipped violently, sliding across the terrain before settling in a heap. He winced in pain as he fought into a fetal position. Mother, I'm sorry. Please forgive me, he replied, reaching his hand out in a begging motion. Her eyes became as red as blood. Who is this prospect? She replied angrily. Flash! Before we could blink, she was standing in front of Eros. She reached down and picked him up with one hand. What is his name? Give it to me, and by the name of my father Zeus, I'll put his head on a spike! She screamed, livid. Eros choked and gagged as she squeezed the life out of him. It wasn't him, he managed, whimpering out each word. What? She replied angrily. Then who was it? He let out, gasping for air. With the little energy he had remaining, he pointed in our direction. Thud! Eros gasped, sucking in as much air as he could as she finally released him.
That boy! The one lying on the ground!
He let out, still gasping for air in between each word.
I saw him through my brother's eyes! He did this!
She turned to us with a look that sent a shiver up my spine. Eros turned to her, still struggling on his knees.
I'm so sorry, Mother,
he replied, begging for mercy. She turned to him with no sympathy.
You've always been a coward, a stain on the line of my father, and my mistake of allowing you to live has cost me my greatest contribution to our world. My son, she replied, I would give your life 1,000 times over if it meant I could get my son back for 1 second. You miserable failure, she replied angrily. Boom! She extended her hand and finished him off with one power shot. Her power was otherworldly, and her demeanor was cold and vicious. The visceral, cold-blooded attitude she carried was beyond anything I witnessed before. It was downright evil and scary. All that remained of Eros was a cloud of dust. If she could do that to her own son, I could only imagine what she had in mind for Pete. No way, I replied, shielding his unconscious body. Before Venus could respond, Sai shielded me. Sai, move, I replied angrily. I quickly used her lightning step technique to move in front of her. You just got out of the hospital, I replied angrily. No, that's just it. I'm still in the hospital, or at least my body is, she replied, walking up beside me. What? How? I replied, turning to her. I don't know. I just woke up in the hospital about a week ago, she replied. I nearly fainted when I saw my body. I was stuck in the hospital for the first couple of days, but after I saw what happened to Beth, I had to do something. So I followed Pete. So all the times I was in the infirmary, you could hear me? I replied. She nodded with an appreciative smile. If the look she gave me had a caption, it would have been easy for the densest person to decipher. But at the time, I just saw her as an appreciative friend. I returned her smile as she answered my question, still bashfully averting her eyes to prevent herself from staring into mine. Yes and no. I tried everything to get back in my body, but it would just reject me, she replied, almost apologetically. The day you came in, with the trials, I felt so hopeless. I got desperate and tried to force my way in. It rejected me violently. That was the reason for the falling flower vase in my room that day. I couldn't capitalize on it because the impact of it knocked me out for a couple of days. When you came to visit, during the commotion you left the door open and I was able to sneak out. I followed Pete, and when I saw you were helping him, I figured I might as well do what I could to help as well. Unfortunately, it seems like I just got in the way. Sean turned to us, flabbergasted by our obsession with each other, before pointing at Venus with a signaling wave. I don't mean to cut off your conversation, you two, but, the crazy and vengeful Nephilim with her mind set on killing your friends is headed this way, he cut in, causing us both to drop into our fighting stance. Get out of the way or I'll kill both of you where you stand, Venus replied coldly as she marched toward us. Woo! With a flick of her wrist, Sai and I flew like pieces of paper in the wind. It was like the magnetic pull itself had yanked us out of the way, while simultaneously sending a pulsating electrical shot through our bodies. She walked like a model down a runway as she strutted toward Pete. Boom! Ugh! I let out as I finally hit the ground. The impact felt like a punch to the stomach. Tim! Sai replied, writhing in pain from the impact of her fall. I crawled, doing everything in my power to get to Pete, but the shot had zapped all my strength. I watched in horror as she marched closer to Pete's unconscious body. I felt helpless as she moved in for the kill. I couldn't move a muscle. I grunted wildly, unable to do anything to save my best friend. Get away from him, Sai shot in a warning tone. Venus turned to her with a cold stare. before continuing her march with a condescending indifference. "Pete, get up," I replied via BAU. "Pete, please, get up." Pete grunted groggily. I shook my head with a sigh. For the looks of things, my BAU had broken through to his unconscious brain. He rolled over, staring up at the vacant sky, trying to get his wits. He was awake, but it was obvious he was still out of it physically. She inched closer to him, like a shark circling her prey as the boy fought to get his bearings. "What's going on?" he managed, still groggy. "Pete, get out of here," Sai replied, fighting to her feet. I moved as fast as I could, flashing to Pete's side with Sai appearing a second later. Zoom! She put a hex on the both of us that made us feel like we were trapped in our own bodies. I fought to control my limbs, but my body wasn't my own. I couldn't move a muscle. I crumbled over, falling to my hands and knees. Sai followed suit as Pete fought to his feet behind us. "Let them go!" he wailed angrily. "You two mosquitoes are like dogs barking at the moon. You're too stupid to understand the magnitude of what you are up against, yet too naive to just walk away," she replied. "Stay out of this." Pete was wobbly. He fought to gain his balance on weak knees as we were once again forced into the role of helpless spectators. "You," she replied, pointing in Pete's direction. "What tribe are you from?" Pete ignored her words, finally fully gaining his consciousness. "What? I don't know," Pete replied. "Who are you?" "She's Venus," Sai replied, before her lips were forcefully closed. Pete lowered his head, shaking it regretfully. "Regardless, it makes no difference," she replied. "Why did you kill my son?" Pete looked toward us sympathetically, then regretfully replied, "My name is Peter Selly of the Theta Delta Prospect Legion," he responded. "It was my undertaking to apprehend your son and the Heaven's Bow. Your son became hostile." The ground erupted around her as she sparked, enraged by the boy's statement. Sai and I rolled around the terrain, being tossed by the sudden shift of the ground, unable to steady ourselves. "Became hostile! He became hostile!" she yelled, getting louder with every reply as she bubbled with anger. "Would you be hostile if you were trapped on a foreign world for over a millennium? Would you be hostile if you broke free, only to be confronted by some snot-nosed kid for a good look on his resume? How reserved would you be given those circumstances?" Pete chuckled, causing the woman to stare at him like she wanted to tear him in two. "I wouldn't be," Pete replied, surprisingly sarcastic and calm considering the danger we were all in. "But I also wouldn't have caused millions of people to die and be thrown into a pit of fire also." "Pete, what are you doing? Why are you—" I managed before she muzzled me. "You have some nerve speaking to me in such a way," she replied, fuming. "I am a princess of Olympia, daughter of Zeus." "You feel better now?" Pete continued, pushing his luck in a mocking tone. "Lady, I could care less what you call yourself. All that matters is this warning." The sound of his axe being unlatched echoed throughout the empty area as he pressed a button on the side of the weapon, extending it. "Listen, princess, I'm going to tell you this once. Let my friends go, or I'm going to knock your head off your shoulders like a golf ball off the tee," he shot confidently. She laughed thunderously. Her power was ridiculous. She was easily the most powerful rebel we had faced so far. The way she effortlessly went from subatomics to elemental to physical traits was like nothing I witnessed before. She was in another league. She made everyone we faced so far seem like child's play. "I'm going to make you regret the day you stepped on my planet," she replied, her eyes turning bright red like a firecracker. Pete readied himself for a fight, but without our help, the fight wasn't going to be long. He didn't have a chance. Yeah, Pete continued to mock. "Just know, you only get 3 moves before I make mine, so use them wisely." He had to have a plan. There was no way he was stupid enough to be bluffing. He had to have something up his sleeve. I couldn't think of anything he could possibly do against a force like Venus. She stared at him with a look that sent a shiver up my spine. "You have no idea the power I possess, prospect," she replied. "Sadly, that'll be your undoing." "Big talk," Pete replied. "Is it?" she replied sternly. Whoosh! The atmosphere became thick, almost like the gates of hell were opening, as she raised her hands high over her head. The outpour of gas caused Pete to cover his mouth, as a foul sulfuric smell filled the air. "Move one," he replied, before falling to his knees, coughing as he spoke. Poof! Sai and I rolled on the ground as she finally released us. I moved my fingers, making sure I regained complete control of my senses. "How is she able to do that?" Sai replied, moving her jaw around like she had been punched square. "It's all subatomics," Pete replied. "Your lips' nerves are all cells that work through a law. Electrical impulses and synapses, to be more specific." "That would have been good to know before she muted us," I responded, mimicking Sai's action, checking my jaw. Slowly, an ear-shattering rupture sounded all around us, creating a gorge the size of the Grand Canyon. "What is that?" Sai replied, turning to the sound. It looked like the world was collapsing in on itself as the terrain around us crumbled. "Pete, let's get out of here," I replied, in awe of what I was seeing. "No," Pete replied. "What do you mean, no?" I responded, turning to him angrily. "I mean, we can't," he replied, pointing ahead. "Why can't we?" I asked, getting more agitated. "I don't know. That?" Sai cut in, pointing ahead. I turned and stared in horror. The ground split open with a sound that rung like a gigantic brass horn. The smell was overwhelming. If it was bad before, now it was 3 times that. "What is that?" I replied, nervous. "What is she doing?" Sai turned to me with a look that signified the answer was something I should already know. "You can't feel that?" she replied, flabbergasted by my demeanor. As she spoke, I finally acknowledged the feeling that had been creeping up my spine since the sound erupted. It was the feeling you feel when you're walking down a dark alley in a bad neighborhood, but 1,000 times worse. "This can't be. It feels like purgatory," I replied, astonished. "And there were millions of demons there. How many are here?" Pete looked at his watch as if to be preparing himself. "I don't know, but this feels like more than a small battalion," Pete replied. "I think we've stumbled into a hornet's nest." Sai shook her head, frustrated. We had gone through so much already, it was hard to grasp the mortal danger we faced, especially considering we were still being monitored by the entirety of the Heaven Realm. It gave us a level of comfort knowing they could step in if things got too crazy. It was literally the only thing that kept me even keeled. "More like a lion's den," she added, pointing, catching our attention. I raised my hands in frustration. Vile beasts of every kind climbed from the canyon. It looked like ants climbing from a colony hill. There were so many. "This can't be real," Sai replied in a flabbergasted tone. Venus stood, defiantly floating above the crater with a smug stare that resonated like our response was expected. "Answer this question, you insignificant runt of a prospect. Where do you think hell is located?" she prodded, with a look that would burrow through metal. We looked forward, not replying, as a sinister smile covered her face. I couldn't believe my eyes as beast after beast climbed from the pit of the hellish prison planet. "What is she talking about, Pete?" Sai asked, turning to him. Pete stared forward with a look that was telling. It seemed the answer was on the tip of his tongue, yet he didn't want to speak. "Why do you think I'm housed here?" she replied with a smug look on her face. "There are many pathways to perdition, both spiritually and physically, but they all lead here. I know you can feel it. The cold shiver on your neck. That burrowing in the pit of your gut. You've probably already figured it out, and if you haven't noticed by now... Her speech was cold yet filled with aggression. She was a lunatic, and it was obvious that beneath her insane demeanor was a cold-blooded killer. Let me be the first to invite you. Welcome to my home. Welcome to the fifth hell, she continued. Whoosh, whoosh, boom! Explosions of gas and fire rang out all around her as she flexed her power. Stay on your guard, you guys, Pete grunted in an intense tone. We shuddered as the beast formed a battle line that seemed to get larger by the second. They stood like mindless beasts without moving. It was like they were under a spell. It was almost like they were an extension of her madness. They lined up behind her. They were intimidating. They were her own personal army. Prospect, there are dimensions to every planet in our solar system. There is the so-called Earth dimension, which you should be familiar with. It is the dimension where you humans and other non-heaven realm beings dwell. The second dimension is the dimension that was created specifically for me and my kind. I'm sure you've heard our dilemma. We're not heavenly beings, so we couldn't go there after we died. So your Father Yahweh created a place for us and created a dimension to jail us on each planet. A dimension that from the minute you apprehended my son, you have been a part of it. The dimensional barrier created by your Father Yahweh has been their saving grace, but you aren't so lucky, she replied, raising her hands in the air. You see, your self-righteous, arrogant Light Guard Council never explained to you that you can't apprehend a Nephilim without going into their dimension. The hell you're currently dwelling in, it so happens to be the fifth dimension of hell. Her words had a ring of truth to me that stung. It made me analyze what we were really doing in these trials. I mean, she had a point. It would have been good to know that we were unknowingly going to a pseudo-pit of hell. Great, what do we do? Sai replied. We can't possibly fight these many demons. I turned to her, confused. Through all the commotion, it hadn't slipped my mind for a second. From the moment I arrived, I was thinking about all the possibilities that could explain why and how she was here. Can you technically be hurt? I replied out of nowhere. I mean, with you being a ghost? Sai cut her eyes. I'm not a ghost. I'm in this dimension. I don't know how it works, but whatever form my soul is currently in, I feel pain and injury here. I'm physically in this dimension. I'm guessing the same happened when you guys teleported here, but that is not so important right now, she fired. How are we getting out of this, Pete? Pete looked forward, scratching his head in a thinking motion. I don't know yet, he replied. I'm just glad to see you. I'll give you more of a welcome when we get out of this place. As for now, I don't know enough and there are too many unknowns to counter-strategize. I turned, looking for any help I could find. I tried to remain calm in the midst of the chaos. I wanted to seem confident so that my friends wouldn't worry, but in order to do so, I had to block out the crazy reality that was staring me in the face. It was getting harder with every beast that climbed out of the pit. Where's Sean? I replied, looking around for any help I could find. Sai surveyed the layout as well. Through all the anarchy, I hadn't even noticed the vast change. Venus was right. The world I watched from afar was gone. It was a volcanic, mountainous inferno. Gone was the beautiful landscape of Venus. It was now a smelling, rotting cesspool of evil, and Sean was nowhere to be found. I don't know. That explosion separated us, Sai replied. But for the time being, we need to focus on us. We have enough problems to worry about. Let his team worry about him. Yeah, Sai's right, Pete replied. Besides, she said that you had to apprehend the Nephilim to end up here. All signs point to Sean never apprehending Eros. I mean, his mother destroyed him. So maybe when Venus changed the dimension, we lost him. His words brought something else to light. I tried to react quickly before things got out of hand. "Uriah, you still there?" I replied. A nervous second passed before he finally replied. "Yes, I'm here," Uriah added. "I told you to wait, little Eli. My gosh, I told you there would be consequences. It was incredibly ill-advised to shoot off like that. It overwhelmed the faith energy threshold. You're stuck. Max and Jade are trying to get to you guys, but you're going to have to fend for yourself until they can open it back up." I shook my head with a sigh. I turned, hoping Pete and Cy didn't overhear his words, but the look on both of their faces made it clear they did. "I appreciate the assistance, Tim, but man, you have a knack for making bad situations worse," Pete shot, shaking his head angrily. "I'm sorry I tried to save your butts," I shot. "Yeah, thanks for doing that," Cy shot back sarcastically. "Remind me to thank you again when I'm on a torture rack in some smelly cell." "So what, are you saying you would be better off without me?" I replied, poking, causing her to shake her head. "No, I'm saying I'd rather have Jade and Max," she replied. The beasts erupted with whelps and growls that filled the evening air, catching our attention and effectively ending our spat. With every disgusting beast that climbed from the abyss, the more saturated with wrath and evil the environment became. It was toxic to my soul. "Well, no use in crying over it now," Cy added. "Yeah. Besides, I know you guys in and out. We have the firepower to hold out until someone can get here," Pete replied. "Yeah, this is an ideal situation to show off our excellent teamwork and what friends can do if they work together," she replied in a mocking tone. "Wonder Spaz Team unite!" I turned to him with a cynical glare. "I think she's being sarcastic," I shot, deathly dry in my response as I closed ranks, as the beasts continued to surround us. "I'm serious," Pete replied, following my lead, pulling Cy toward us as he moved. My heart should have been beating 1,000 miles a minute. I should have been terrified, but for some reason I wasn't. It reminded me of the Battle of New Angeles, and with everything we had been through since then had strengthened my resolve. I was becoming less sensitive to danger. It didn't affect me the way it used to, and that was scary to me. I was becoming confident, maybe even cocky. "Well, maybe this thing will come in handy," I replied, reaching in my backpack and pulling out the relic that I had earned in my undertaking. I pulled out the newly attained relic. It shined in the night air as I swirled it and slammed it into the ground, sending a ripple of energy throughout the terrain. "Is that the relic from your undertaking?" Pete replied, staring at it. "Are you sure you should be doing this right now? I mean, do you even know how to use it?" I shrugged in an indecisive manner. "Not really, but it's an extension of my Moses staff, right?" I replied. "So, let's see what happens when I put them together." I felt around and pulled out my staff. As the two objects neared one another, they began to gravitate to each other like magnets. As they connected, a light emanated from them both. They liquefied and combined into a beautiful flowing light, then instantly hardened into a pearly white staff twice the size of my former staff. The old wooden staff had been replaced by a beautiful long bow. I held it out, taken by its beauty. "How did you get that?" Venus replied, focusing in on it. I hesitated, not sure if I should answer. Cy looked forward intently as Pete walked up and stood beside her. "I got it from an Atlantis compound," I replied, twirling it in a mocking manner. "That's the property of the Olympians. Give it to me. Now!" she ordered, floating high above her army. "Why don't you come and get it?" Pete replied, stepping in front of me. I turned to Pete, shaking my head. "Could you reserve the taunts for you?" I shot sarcastically, shaking my head in frustration, causing Pete to wince apologetically.
Don't send epically insane mourning mothers at me in the future, if that is in any way possible. She grinned, showing she could showcase an emotion besides anger. I think I'd rather they did it for me, she replied, waving in a pointed manner over the entire platoon of goons. Good try, but I'm sure you are aware of Light Guard law, which states that I can't technically lay a hand on a Light Guard prospect under any circumstances until the time of the tribulation. I turned to Pete, who wore a telling smile on his face. But luckily, there is nothing that prevents you from dealing with the 10th Guard, she replied. As she finished her speech, she turned to a large goblin-looking Highgate. Subdue them and bring me the bow and the loudmouth one, she replied, turning and walking through a portal hole. The Highgate smiled and signaled for the rest of the unit to attack. They seemed to move out instantly. Triple face defense, Pete barked. Tim, you got north to southwest. Sai, you're north to northeast, and I'll take south. We sprinted into position as the first wave attacked. I held the bow out in a defensive position, not sure how to use it yet. Bang! Boom! We hit with shearing velocity as they attacked. They had us badly outnumbered, but we laid them down like they were nothing. Our skills had evolved vastly in comparison to our last battle. Watch out! Sai replied, darting around me gracefully. Wham! I ducked as she catapulted off my back, catching an incoming assailant with a drop kick. Before I could blink, she was back in position. Duck, you guys, Pete replied, multiplying the length and size of his hammer. Whop, whop, whop. He mowed them down as he spun, chopping the opposition in half, walloping and sending them flying in different directions. I noticed an attacker over his right shoulder. I dematerialized, immediately anticipating his path. I shot through Pete's body and nailed him with a blow that caused collateral damage that took out a wave of attackers close to him. Thanks, Tim, Pete replied, still in the midst of fighting. The more we fought, the more congested things got. No matter how fast we chopped them down, they just kept coming. Element Alpha, Lightning Command, Thunder Echo, Sai replied. Cover your ears, now! Pete and I followed her command, covering our ears. Her katanas lit up like lanterns as thunder erupted, causing everyone around us to explode like cake batter. Swap, swap, swap! She moved with blistering agility and speed, chopping them down. Element Epsilon, Earth Command, Pangea Quake, I commanded while ducking for cover. Rumble, 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 quake! The ground around us split with an ear-splitting eruption, dragging the disgusting demons back to the hell they had climbed out of. Let's get to higher ground, Pete replied, pointing to a high point on the mountainous range. Sai and I agreed, following as he jumped to the top spot. I sighed, staring at the army of demons still pressing in on us. We're not going to be able to keep this up, I replied, huffing like a fat kid. There's too many of them. We have to, Pete responded. Uriah, how long will it take before they can get here? I could hear it in Uriah's sigh before he spoke. It wasn't going to be good news. Well, Tim's teleportation sent a charge through the grid. Now they have to manually find your position until the grid comes back up. There are over 1 million of them, so you can imagine that's not going to be easy. If you add the fact that your light energy is being blocked by the intense evil of the second hell, it's going to be that much harder. His words did little to motivate our already disheartened spirits. Pete stood up, getting into position as the hellish army began to attack again. I hesitated as Sai extended a hand, helping me to my feet. Hey, we're supposed to be hot stuff, right? She replied with a smirk. This is our opportunity to prove it. Smash! Before I could blink, Pete had flattened an incoming beast with a hammer shot that made him explode like a pumpkin at a harvest festival. Exactly, he replied. Whoosh!
I watched in awe as he threw his hammer like a boomerang, mowing down the incoming assailants. Well, since we're showing off, Sai replied, combining her katanas. Element Alpha, Lightning Command, Lightning Shower. Swoosh! She shot a lone shot into the air. We waited with bated breath as it exploded, raining lightning arrows down all around us. I knew she was good, great even, but what I saw next gave me goosebumps. You two watch each other's back, she replied, turning to us. I'll be back. I grabbed her in a defiant manner. No way, I replied. It's not happening. Luke barely kept from tearing us apart the last time you ended up in the hospital. She shrugged off my hand, looking forward with an intense stare. I'm a Dom, remember? She replied. I'm 10 times stronger than I was then. If you want to see how much stronger, try to stop me. The strongest will protect the other, remember? I have the ability to evolve too, Sai, I responded. You're not stronger than I am. She gave me a stubborn stare before continuing. Trust me, you're going to have to prove it, she challenged. You're not dying for me again. You'll have to end me first. Her words were stern and passionate. I couldn't understand it. Our position hadn't been compromised. She had no reason to take the risk Sai was proposing. Yes, her leaving would take the heat off of us, but we could barely sustain a fight together. How could she possibly fight alone? Sai, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to fight you. We're also not going to allow you to sacrifice yourself, I fired. And there's 2 of us and 1 of you, right, Pete? Pete's expression was blank. He turned to me with an apologetic look on his face. Pete? I replied, unable to comprehend the rationale behind allowing Sai to take such a risk. He sighed as if he was thinking of a way to make me understand. I don't like it any more than you do, he replied. But she's right. We have to cut their numbers down. Sai's invisibility gives her the best chance of surviving alone. I shook my head defiantly. It's not going to happen, I shot angrily. If you try it, Dom or not, I'll knock you out and drag you back to the heaven realm myself. I'm not losing you again. How do you think I felt on the day you went to purgatory, Tim? She shot, exhausted. You had no other choice. Right now, neither do I. I'm warning you, Sai. Please, don't make me do this, I shot in a stern, begging tone. My eyes lit up as I spoke. Sai stared at me, regretfully dropping her head in a sorrowful manner. Before I could finish powering up, I felt a hit to the back of my skull that sent me sprawling. I turned to see Pete standing over me. What are you doing? I screamed desperately, staring at Sai helplessly. Pete leaped on top of me, holding me down with his hammer before turning to Sai. Go now, Sai, he replied. Hurry! Sai turned to me apologetically. I'm sorry, Tim, but it's the only way, she replied. Trust me, I promise I'll be fine. I felt like I was losing her all over again. To be honest, I couldn't deal with going through the rest of the trials without her. It had been too long, and now she was about to risk disappearing again. I couldn't let it happen. Get off of me, Pete, I replied, powering up. Explosion! I let out a power spark that nearly took out the whole mountain peak. Pete flew high in the air. I flashed, snatching him out of the air before turning my attention to Sai, but she was too fast. She disappeared before I could get close to her. Sai! I screamed, dropping Pete with a thud. Why did you do that? I wanted to tear him apart, but with the beast bearing down on him, I had to focus my attention, or Sai's sacrifice would have been for nothing. I told you why. It's the best plan to get us all out of here. You're so adamant about us trusting you. Try giving us the same luxury, Tim, he replied, knocking the dust off his pants as he stood up. Forget that crap, Pete, I replied lividly, still fuming. This is not some video game.
I don't care if it was the best plan. It was too risky. It's Sai! Before I could finish my speech, a lightning strike erupted, taking out a battalion of attacking demons. The strike was so powerful, it sent me and Pete flying. I watched in awe as a silhouette in the lightning revealed Sai. Sai? I replied, unable to believe her power. Pow! 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 She mowed them down. Her punches were quick. Before one assailant dropped, another was feeling a blow. It was amazing how good she was. My jaw was on the ground. Tim, get ready, Pete replied, placing his hand on my shoulder. He swung his mallet like he was gearing it up for an attack. I nodded, powering up. The annoyance in the pit of my stomach was still there, but I swallowed it in an attempt to do what was in the best interest of getting us out of there in one piece. Let's go, I replied, summoning power that surged through me. Quick! The beast cowered as the mountains around them began to shake. I hated the plan, but I would destroy myself before I let them lay a hand on Pete or Sai. The opposition had no idea how powerful I could be when I had to be. My back was against a wall, and the only way out was through them. My punches seemed to explode the volcano of emotions erupting inside me, all over the face of a nearby rebel. I leaped into overdrive, hitting the ground running, giving everything I had. We fought valiantly until it felt like our bones and cells weighed 1,000,000 pounds. The fight had been waging on for nearly an hour. We hit them with everything we had. The beasts took their lumps and kept coming. Elements, Delta and Epsilon, Wind and Earth command. Wind Boulder Barrage, I commanded, so exhausted I could barely get the words out. The ground erupted as I swung the wind like a slingshot, sending comets of boulders peppering as many of them as I could. It did little to cut their numbers, but I didn't care. I had one sole purpose, and that purpose was getting me and my friends out of that hell in one piece. Tim, don't break formation, Pete warned. Ping! Whack! 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 He threw his extended mallet, trimming them down. It was futile. None of the blows seemed to stick. They would just rub off the blow, climb back to their feet, and leap back into the fray. Erupt! Crumble! Crumble! I moved the mountain, once again making the foundations crumble all around. We were running out of room to maneuver. Zap! Boom! Sai appeared, smashing a line of them before disappearing again. We were woefully outnumbered, and our reserves were running low. We fought bravely, but we were surviving on our will to protect each other alone. Sai, get back here. It's not worth it, I replied. Let's retreat to a different peak and regroup. Pete nailed at a group of attacking rebels with a spinning mallet throw. He landed, turned, and smashed two more with the ricochet of his swinging weapon before holstering it on his back as he retreated. He's right, Sai, he replied, backpedaling as I followed suit. It's a bust. Get back. The divide and conquer has served its purpose. We don't have enough room to split up anymore. Before I could move my mouth to reply, she appeared, falling to one knee. Her hair was matted to her head, soaked in blood and guts. She looked as exhausted as Pete and I were. Well, what are we going to do? She replied, holding her side, taking exhausted breath as she spoke. We can't keep this up. The longer it takes, the better it is for them. Where were Max and Jade? We had been fighting forever. My body felt heavy, and the constant maneuvering had me mentally shot. We had really stuck our noses in it, and there was no way out. An explosion erupted just above us. They scouted our motives and beat us to the spot. Flash! I grabbed Sai and Pete and diverted our trajectory to a nearby mountain ledge. They're getting smothered, I replied. That was close. Pete shook his head as we backed up into formation, leaning against each other. I could feel their weight. They were more exhausted than I was. I felt like I was the only thing holding them up. Come on, you guys, I replied, trying to support them. Don't give up. It can't be too long now. We've been fighting for over an hour, Sai groaned, collapsing. I just need time to regain my strength. Pete fell to one knee as well. I know, me too, but we can't. They're cornering us in, Pete disclosed. They're going to come in for the kill with their heavy hitters soon. I nodded, knowing what I had to do. Sai, hide Pete, I ordered, and get to the top of that peak. I'll stay here and fight until Jade and Max get here. They both shot to their feet at the sound of my words. Sai looked at me in a begging manner, shaking her head vehemently. No way, Sai replied, putting on a strong face. She's right. Sai's actions were a part of a strategy to buy time, and it worked. It bought us valuable time. Yours is just a sacrifice. It's not going to happen, Pete replied. We're not going to leave you. I exhaled, too exhausted, trying to build the energy to argue my point as I continued. Whether you stay down here or you disappear, at some point I'm going to be all by myself. We should use this time for you guys to regain your strength. You can come back and save my butt if Max and Jade haven't shown up before that, I argued. You're right, it is a sacrifice considering how little I have in the tank. I won't lie about that, but I'm the reason we're stuck here to begin with. I'm not letting you guys take the fall for my mistake. Besides, it's the best plan we have. Pete shook his head defiantly before Sai's angry look gave way to a tirade. Like I said, it's not going to happen, Pete replied, calming Sai as she nodded in agreement. They're about to send a kill squad this way, and whether we are worthless or not, you don't stand a chance. You'll buy us seconds at best. You want to help us, then don't make us watch our best friend get the tar beat out of him. We may not be where we were an hour ago, but we'll at least go down together. I objected with a shake before relenting. I needed to conserve my energy, and waging a losing battle would only waste more time. There was no way I was getting them to back down and leave me alone to fight a demon army. Just get behind me and back me up, I ordered as they both nodded. Don't enter the battle unless you have to. They both begrudgingly agreed. Here they come, Pete replied. A group of assassins attacked. The one-eyed Cyclops beasts landed as if they were teleported. They stared us down like hungry beasts cornering their prey. I nodded, accepting the challenge as I shooed Pete and Sai behind me. They're going into a Delta defense, Pete replied, analyzing them right away. The one in the middle is the strongest. Take him and cripple their defense. Right, I replied, flashing into action immediately. Then smash! I dematerialized through the front line and face-palmed the point man with violent force that took his head clean off his shoulders. Element Alpha, Light Command, Solar Flare, Sai replied. Flash! An explosion of light blinded the remaining front guardsmen. Blast! Blast! Boom! I shot a light energy blast from my palm, taking out the distracted assailants before sending a wind palm blast into the ground. The momentum sent the rest of the Legion flying in various directions. How can you even fight in this state? Sai uttered, still recovering from using her powers. I'm a Dom and I can barely stand. Pete stared, shaking his head in awe. You should have seen him during his trial, he uttered, balancing himself exhaustedly on one hand. The kid is a cyborg. He took out an ocean floor full of dino sharks the last time he was exhausted. Made his record-breaking game against Lincoln Springs look average. Sai stared at me, admiring me as I continued fighting with everything I had in me. That good, huh? She shot, staring at me proudly. Flash! Pete nodded, mimicking her demeanor as I flashed in front of them, blocking, out of breath. I had unreal reserves, but I was starting to feel the effects of putting my body through such a battle. You guys okay? I replied, putting up a facade. The Captain Highgate stood high above the beast. He looked at me like I was an oddity he was trying to understand.
This is absurd. He shouldn't be able to stand," he replied, moving his hand, signaling for the beast to cease attacking. "Boy, what is your name?" I inhaled, catching my breath before replying. "Tim. My name is Timothy Eli," I replied defiantly, fighting to catch my breath. He stared, scratching his stubby beard. He had a mohawk with a mullet-like ponytail. Like most Highgate vampires, his skin was deathly pale. The look suited his ice-cold demeanor as he continued. "Makes sense. An Eli," he replied with a tiresome smirk. Explosion! Before I could blink, he hit me with a shot that sent me hard into a nearby mountainside. The shards from the hard rock cut me left and right as I burrowed into the terrain of the mountain. "Ah!" I let out as the weight of the mountain began to collapse in all around me. My body felt like it had been sent through a meat grinder. I struggled with everything I had, crawling to get back to the summit of the opening as the weight of the mountain began to squeeze in on me with every inch. "Pete, sigh!" I grunted in unfathomable pain as I fought to get back to my vulnerable friends. I stared in horror as I finally made it back to the opening. Sai lay unconscious as she cradled Pete's lifeless body in one arm. "No," I replied, trying to power up. I dropped my head, unable to muster a single spark of energy to help Pete. "Ah!" I let out as an electric charge shot through me. He grinned from ear to ear, shaking his head. "Don't waste your time, boy," he replied. "That was a subatomic blow. Your nervous system is rejecting you. You think because you and your friends have a little bit of natural ability, you've kinged this game. But what you don't realize is you're playing tic-tac-toe while we've learned to play chess. There are so many intricacies, techniques, and combinations that only experience can bring. You fumble in the dark, swinging at any and everything. We watch laughing, whilst waiting to strike at the most opportune time in that very same darkness you navigate through blindly. Smile. You've been outclassed, boy." I struggled to remain conscious as he walked toward his army, mocking me with a flippant turn on his heel. "No, I won't let you!" "Ah!" I managed, trying to power up again before another shock set in. I watched as it seemed everything was slipping away from me. "Give him..." Boom! I felt energy that seemed to sizzle everything around me like bacon on a hot plate. Something or someone landed with a volcanic yet elegant impact. I slowly felt the effects of the demon's blow dissipating. I could finally move. I flipped on my back, still lacking the energy to summon light energy, as I gasped in pain. "Tim, you okay?" I heard a voice call out. I turned to see Sean standing between me and the Highgate. I was startled for a second. Then, with the last of my energy, I crawled over to Sai and shielded her lifeless body. The Highgate seemed almost intimidated before switching to a stale smile. "And you're the cavalry, I take it," he replied, turning to his men. The crowd of beasts burst into laughter. Their laughs seemed to fill him with confidence. "The Light Guard in their infinite wisdom sends a child to take us out," he mocked sarcastically. Sean ignored them, turning to me once again. "Tim, you okay?" he replied, helping me to my feet. I nodded, unable to understand how he got there as my spinning head and aching body fought to hold me up. "Yeah, I'll be fine. I'm just shot. Really, my biggest concern is Sai and Pete," I replied. "I got to do something." He nodded sympathetically. "How did you get here in the first place?" I continued, stumbling. "It took some doing, but nobody knows realm code like me," he replied with a confident smile. "It's sort of my forte." I looked at him like he was pulling my leg. "What is realm code?" I replied. Realm code is the frequency in which a dimension exists. It's the mathematic law that houses and separates each dimension. It encompasses distance, time, and subatomic frequencies. I won't bore you with the details. Just know there are billions of combinations. My father is a part of the Light Guard Explorer Corps, so I pretty much spend the better part of my time here studying realm code. I know it like the back of my hand. I'm one of the best, if not the best prospect on the docket at this stuff, he replied. But I'm thinking I outdid myself on this one. I think I even beat the Light Guard elite here.
Hey,
the Highgate cut in, seething.
I was speaking to you, boy.
Sean slowly turned his attention to the demon for the first time. I'm sorry, are you talking to me? Sean replied politely. His response visibly threw the horde. They all looked at him like he was a freak until the demon finally responded.
Yes, I'm speaking to...
On second thought, shut up, Sean replied calmly. The Highgate struggled to speak as I watched, unable to believe what was going on. Replied, walking like a teacher chastising a class. I really would have liked to have shown up, kicked Cupid all over the yard, and left with the relic, but I knew that would be stupid. It would be stupid because there was no way I could be sure that he had the relic. So, I figured I'd chase him until he led me to Aeneas. I figured from there, it wouldn't take me long with Pete's help to take them both out. But as luck would have it, my fellow prospect was a little better than I had anticipated. He beat me to the punch. But I smile now because here I am and there it is. And here I was thinking I was going to have to fight Pete for it. Not something I was looking forward to. Not that I didn't think I could win. That wasn't the problem. The problem was hurting a fellow guardsman. But luckily, you guys were stupid enough to butt your nose into our business. So I guess I'll just have to bask in the prospect of taking it from you instead. The horde of beasts looked on, unable to comprehend what was going on. I was also struggling to understand how a kid my age could be so powerful. The horde once again broke into laughter as the head Highgate still struggled to speak. Wham! Before I could blink, the demon seemed to flinch. I never saw Sean move, but with a mere flicker he was standing with Pete in one arm. He dropped him and flipped the arrow up and down like it was a lucky coin.
Who are you?
The demon replied, shaking uncontrollably. Sean cut his eyes at his words. That should be the least of your worries, he replied starkly. Shake! Kaboom! He shuddered, then exploded into a million pieces. I couldn't believe my eyes as the rest of the horde cowered as Sean turned to them with an icy glare that even put me on edge. So, who's next? He replied with a mischievous smirk. Roar, roar, roar! The horde let out, running toward us. I readied my staff for yet another battle, barely able to stand. Stop! A voice thundered, sending ripples through the atmosphere. Zap! Kaboom! Kaboom! Max and Jade finally arrived, landing with explosions that aided the shockwaves that were already quaking throughout the battlefield, halting everything and everyone in their tracks. Their power was unreal. Peter, Tim, Sarai, Jade replied, searching immediately. He searched before finally finding us. He took a few steps, then stopped, surprised to see Sean. Sean, how did you get here? Jade replied, thrown. Sean quickly changed his demeanor, losing the icy stare that sent chills through the horde minutes earlier. It's a long story, he replied, still flipping the arrow. As Jade and Max approached, the horde retreated into the ground like they were standing in quicksand with varying welts and roars. I stood in fighting stance until the last one disappeared, then fell to my butt, happy it all seemed to be over. It took you guys long enough, I replied, taking a deep breath.
Yeah, sorry about that. But you've got to understand, a Hell Realm code is probably the most complicated code in existence. It takes time, Max apologized. Well, at least it's supposed to.
Sean raised his hand sarcastically. "Hey, I just got here myself," he replied. Jade walked over to Sai. He energized her using light healing. She rumbled for a second or two, then awoke in a daze. "What's going on?" she replied. She sputtered, then leaped to her feet, prepared to battle once again. "Tim! Pete!" she replied, surveying the layout frantically. "I'm fine," I replied, raising my hand in a sarcastically embarrassed tone. "Let's just hope the same can be said for Pete." My words prompted a continued search before she finally found Pete. "He'll be fine, but in his condition, he won't be able to challenge for the relic. Knowing how hot-blooded you Earthborns tend to be, I won't risk waking him and trying to talk him off that ledge. That being said, seeing as he probably won't be overjoyed to hear he lost the trial, it'll probably be best to wait until after we get him back to the hotel before waking him," Jade replied. Sai nodded before finally noticing Sean. "Ah, hi," she replied, looking at me with a suspicious gaze. "Hi," he replied with a smile, extending his hand. "Sean." She hesitated, then returned his shake with an awkward smile that fell between flattered and confused. "Sai," she replied bashfully. "I would ask what you're doing here, but I'm sure it has something to do with that arrow you're carrying." I walked over, separating the two. I was proud to call them both friends in that moment. I leaned as they both playfully supported me. "You don't know the half," I added. "Let's just say it's a good thing he showed up when he did. I mean, he really saved our butts." He looked away humbly, embarrassed. "Well, thank you, Sean. Whether you were doing it for your mission or to help a fellow guardsman, the Light Guard appreciates your assistance," Jade replied, as dry as unbuttered morning toast. "Yeah, thanks," Sai replied, looking him in the eye with a smile. He nodded, returning her smile with a smile of his own. "Anytime," he replied, continuing his nervous nod. "I appreciate the gratitude, and I don't mean to be rude, but my legion is kind of waiting on me." "Oh, by all means," Max replied. He nodded, punching some numbers into his watch as a portal slowly appeared. "Thanks again, Sean. I owe you one," I replied sincerely. He shook his head, holding back a grin. "Don't mention it," he replied. "We may be on different legions, but in the end, we're on the same team, right?" I nodded, once again unable to believe someone so powerful could be so cool. He was the complete opposite of Jacob. His power was on Jacob's level, but his personality was reminiscent of my own. "I couldn't have said it better myself," Jade responded with a nod. He raised his hand in agreement, waving to us as he disappeared through the portal hole. Max tossed Pete over his shoulder as we prepared to leave. As we shot back through the portal hole, I filled Sai in on everything she missed. It was another end to a long trial. We had done 3, and so far, I was the only one who won. All the gusto we came in with was starting to dwindle. These guys were good, and all the results so far showed they were in another league in comparison to us. The results were the last thing on Jacob's mind. He stood, staring me down like he wanted to send a bolt at my head as I approached. "I'm done," Jacob replied, exhausted. "I mean, what are the chances that you would be directly responsible for yet another situation where you almost get half of your friends wiped out while trying to help them? Is it me, or do you love to do impulsive, stupid things? Do you realize if you just would have listened and focused, half of the problems we've run into would have been pieces of cake?" I ignored him, tossing my bag on a nearby chair. I looked for Eve, but she was nowhere to be found. Yeah, I replied, ignoring him. He cut his eyes at me. "Tim, I know we're in the heaven realm, but if you yeah me one more time, I'm going to knock you into next week," he replied in a warning tone. I quickly changed my demeanor, cowering as he walked toward me. "All right, Jay, just calm down," I replied, chuckling as I used the table as a shield. He threw his hands up, surrendering as he turned back to the arena. The demeanor had to be off-putting considering the circumstance, but I was too happy about Sai's appearance for anything else to register.
"Would you look at this?" Luke replied, shaking his head. "We're getting our butts kicked."
"Ah, yay!" the crowd roared as Sean hoisted the arrow high above his head. He humbly bowed as we watched like sore losers. "Well, at least Pete was accepted into the academy," Danielle added, trying to be positive. Luke stared at her with a blank stare.
"Don't get me wrong, that's all good, but what difference does it make for the competition?" he replied. "I mean, we're getting slaughtered. Have some pride."
"I do have pride. You would know that if you had brains," she shot back.
"You okay, Tim?"
said a voice from behind me. I turned to see Sam, but he seemed different. He seemed humble, almost nervous. I guess he had done the math. With me, Beth, Pete, Uriah, and Sai out of the equation, it only left the twins, Eve, Luke, Jacob, Danielle, and him. The numbers were thinning out, and I think he knew it.
"Yeah, I'm fine," I replied.
"You were awesome," Zach gushed, plopping down next to me. "Yeah, awesome," Joe seconded. "But that Sean kid was better. Do you really know him? I mean, are you guys friends?" "You traitor," Zach replied. "Tim was just tired. He could kick that kid's butt any day, right, Tim?" I ignored his statement and continued to stare at the frenzy going on inside the stadium. I wasn't used to being on the losing side of anything. It was a weird feeling. I still think Tim's the best. I'm not a traitor, I just think Sean's cool," Joe responded. "Yeah, well, that's still lame," Zach shot back. "Shut up, Zach, no it isn't," Joe fired back. The two tussled as I rose to my feet and headed toward the barrier.
"What does any of this mean?"
said Sam, causing me to turn to him. He lowered his head, staring out at the crowd bashfully. "I don't know. What do you mean by this?" I replied.
"I mean, for us," he continued,
catching everybody's attention in the room.
"We came here with all these expectations, but if we keep losing then, I don't know, faith is supposed to be so key to our power, right?"
"Yeah, spit it out," Luke replied, unnerved.
"Oh, sorry," Sam responded. "Well, it seems like the smartest thing to do would be to believe we're going to win. It's hard to do that with us bickering and putting each other down. You guys are right. We are losing, but we haven't lost. We should be using this time to build our faith or something." "Seriously?" Luke replied. "Faith is not something you can control. If it was, everybody in the world would have it. Believe me, I know. It's a practice. We're not down because we want to be. We're down because we have bad faith. Well, at least some of us do."
"Well, that's his point," Jacob intervened. "And he's right. We shouldn't be arguing with each other. We don't know how to build faith just yet, but we definitely don't need to be tearing each other down." We all nodded, accepting his words. I didn't really feel like it applied to me. I turned to the middle of the arena as the festivities were winding down. "Yeah, Jacob's right, especially considering our present company outside Tim are the ones on the chopping block," Danielle added. "And looking at how we've performed, it's not going to be easy to muster up the faith we need to swing the momentum."
"Well, Pete had a plan before Captain Save-A-Lot came to the rescue," Luke replied sarcastically.
"What?" I replied, oblivious.
"Right, Jacob?"
he replied, turning to Jacob. I cut my eyes at his words, preparing to be bored to death by another way for him to blame me for some imaginary problem that he construed to make me look bad. He ignored Luke for a couple of seconds before finally relenting. "Yes, please share how yet another thing is my fault," I poked, agitated.
"What?"
Jacob replied, cutting his eyes, showcasing a threatening slight hem of light around his pupil. I straightened up quickly as he shook his head and continued.
"Believe it or not, I didn't want to further showcase your idiocy. I have to believe sooner or later it's going to reflect poorly on me, he replied, showing some semblance of a personality. Jacob, come on, I pressed. Get to the point. Look, it's just a hypothesis I came to after looking over Pete's kiosk, he continued. Kiosk? I responded. Yeah, it's like a BAU catalog. Everything we do or say is cataloged. Here in heaven, it's how they keep tabs on everyone in the heaven realm, he replied, staring out at the roaring crowd. Anyways, something didn't sit right with me when I watched Pete today, so I decided to check his catalog. He spent hours building in that library, and those 3 bots he showcased wouldn't take close to that long. I did some further digging, and with the anointed metals Pete was using, there is no way those supplies were used on those 2 bots. There is no way. I also watched the way he fought. He purposely reserved his strength like he was preparing for something. I thought about his words and replayed the entire fight using my ability, and every cue Pete used his fighting style. Jacob was spot on. He was holding back. With the commotion of the battle, I must have missed it. So, case in point, if you didn't butt into the fight and lock the portal, Light Guard security shows up and Sean and Pete battle for the relic, Luke replied, butting in. Instead, the dimension locks, causing Pete to get knocked out and causes you guys to forfeit his chance at a duel. I don't know about you, but if I was Pete, I would be pissed. I shook my head, not even wanting to think about the ramifications of our decision. Did we really just rob Pete of the chance to pull off an upset? I had little time to stew over the question, as Jade and Max appeared with Sai, who looked a little worse for wear. Long time no see, sis, Luke replied, running up to her and scooping her up, and she blushed bashfully. Luke, put me down. I'm almost 13 years old. Stop treating me like I'm in preschool, she shot, trying to hide how she enjoyed the boy's embrace. Luke placed the girl back on the ground as the 2 shared sympathetic stares before I cut in. How's everything working? I replied, scanning her. Fine, she replied, pushing Luke away. I'm fine, as long as Luke stops acting like I'm a porcelain doll. She fixed her shirt as the rest of the gang hugged and greeted her. So, what was it like? Danielle replied. You know, the whole multi-dimension situation? I'll explain it later. We have more pressing issues, she replied, pointing toward the big board. Danielle slowly turned as the board lit up and flipped. It felt good to not worry about being chosen, but judging by the way things had been going so far, it seemed like I was in more danger watching than I was when I was actually participating. Come on, please let it be Jake, Zach replied. We need to win. We all stood in suspense as the tile finally stopped, showcasing Evelyn to Mila. I shook my head in frustration. Here we go again. The crowd erupted as the tile stopped. Crap, we lose again, Joe responded quickly. Hey, that's my girlfriend you're talking about, Zach fired. She's my girlfriend, Joe replied. Your girlfriend? You just said she was going to lose, Zach shot back. I said we're going to lose, Joe explained. Yeah, we're going to lose because you believe she's going to lose, stupid, Zach shot again. Shut up, Zach, Joe responded. You shut up, Zach replied. I looked over at Sai, who was casing the room looking for Eve. Where is Eve? She replied, turning to me. Luke turned to Danielle, who snapped out of her trance and explained. Oh, sorry. Yeah, she went back to the hospital to watch the trials with her sister. She said she wanted to be by her side when she awoke, she explained. As she spoke, the big board went black, then broadcasted a live video feed of Eve next to her sister's bed. She looked caught off guard by the sudden exposure. Her eyes went dim as a banner on the television read, Tamila has chosen her challenger. Turn it on, Luke replied, turning to Jade and Max. I can't hear anything with the crowd going crazy. Jade's eyes lit up as he created a viewing orb in seconds.
Yes, it's true. We have the first Nakam match, said Bruce Davis as the credits were running. It looks like this already fantastic battle just took another interesting turn. I'm Bruce Davis with Mel Michaels, and we'll see you bright and early for Day 4 of the Light Guard trials. Good night, everyone. We all stood, trying to translate his words before Sam finally spoke. What's a Nakam? He replied with a dull look on his face. A Nakam is a duel match where a prospect challenges another prospect who has already gone through a trial. I'm sure you guys can guess who Evelyn chose, Max replied with a disappointed headshake. Cadmiel, I replied, annoyed. Man, what is Eve thinking? She's thinking about revenge, duh, Luke replied. Well, let's hope she's not, Jade replied. What do you mean? Jacob responded. Well, if that is her reasoning, then it cancels her merit for a duel, Jade responded. By admission, she would be forfeiting the match. Are you serious? Jacob continued. Can we switch and make her pick someone else? No, Jade replied, shaking his head apologetically. Unfortunately, once it's done, it's done. Man, Eve is such a hothead. Seriously, this is retarded. She's going to cost us another match, whether she admits this is about revenge or not. Did you see that girl? She mopped the floor with Beth. Eve's better, but come on, she doesn't stand a chance against that girl, Luke added. I shook my head and grabbed my bag. I had to talk to her. I know the situation with Beth had her heated, but this was not only dangerous, it was unbelievably selfish. We all saw what that girl did to Beth. She was brutal, and to put us through that again was wrong. Where are you going? Jacob replied as I grabbed my bag. I'm going to talk to Eve and check in on Pete, I replied, pulling out my medallion. Wait, I'll come too, Sai replied. Me too, Sam shot. The old gang back together. He shot next to Sai with super speed and gave her a one-arm hug, laying his head on her shoulder before moving his lips toward hers in a playful manner. Sam, I know you're happy to see me, but if your lips so much as graze mine, you're going to have to reattach them, Sai replied, grabbing her medallion and shoving him. Stop playing around. He chuckled as he fumbled around, looking for his medallion. Wait, hold up, let me get mine, he sputtered, grabbing his medallion as we waited impatiently. Tell Eve we said thanks for forfeiting our win whether she wins or loses, Luke shot, turning toward Jacob for a co-signing statement. Oh yeah, and try to not get my little sister knocked unconscious again, you two. I ignored him as my medallion lit up. I peered through the portal door. I could see Eve sitting next to Beth, who lay unconscious in her hospital bed. I walked through, startling her. Tim, I was so worried. My gosh, I don't think I'm going to survive another one of these trials. I think I blew one of these monitors screaming at the monitor, she replied, rising and giving me a hug before turning to Sai as a tear appeared as emotions erupted from her. Hikari! She turned as Sai leaned in and gave her a hug. I should kill both you guys, she replied. I thought you were done for, but it's good to see you're okay. I checked on Pete a few minutes ago. He should be coming along any moment now. They're just doing some last-second tests to make sure he's fine. Her demeanor made things even harder. I swallowed hard, preparing my words, trying to think of the best way to say what I was thinking. Yeah, that's good, I replied, almost mumbling. How's Beth? She shrugged her shoulders. I've been trying to communicate with her ever since Sai appeared, but I'm getting nothing, she continued with a smile. Sai looked at me, then turned to her like she didn't want to be the bearer of bad news, before taking a deep breath and continuing. I heard the doctors say my case was a special case. I think it had more to do with the fact that I was a dom or something, Sai replied. Yeah, that's exactly what it was, said Pete, entering the room, catching everyone off guard. Pete, I replied, turning to him. Hi, good to see you guys got out of there, he replied with a dim smile. I took a deep breath and prepared to apologize before he could even say anything. Yeah, look, I just want to apologize for not giving you the chance to... Forget about it, Pete replied, cutting me off. I stood staring at him in total shock. I had never known Pete to take someone underestimating him so well. I couldn't believe my ears. Are you sure you're the Pete I know? Sai poked, giving him a hug. Or am I still in some alternate universe? Yeah, but the way I acted in that battle, I was an idiot. I've been thinking about it ever since I got up. The last thing I remembered was seeing you being bounced into a mountain and Sai taking a wicked blow, but all I could think about was the fact that I was going to lose. That scared me. The first thought wasn't about you or Sai's well-being. It was about the fact that I was about to lose the stupid relic. I remember you said when Sai first got hurt that I was starting to take this thing too serious. You were right. This whole thing was a selfish attempt for me to live up to the legacy our parents left behind. We're here in the heaven realm, and I'm still trying to outdo my father. I guess I got carried away, and I owe both you and Uriah an apology. I sputtered, not knowing what to say as everyone in the room's attention turned toward me. Sure, don't mention it. I'm just glad you're okay, I managed, giving him a high five. Yeah, and I'm pissed you guys didn't invite me, Sam replied. I mean, I would have destroyed more of those demon creeps than either of you. Shut up, Sam, Sai and Eve replied simultaneously. They both started laughing at the coincidence. Man, it feels good to have my partner in crime back, Eve replied tongue-in-cheek. Hey, Pete, what were you talking about when you said Sai's ability did it? I asked, turning to him. Oh, well, yesterday I was researching the subatomic makeup of DOMs, for my bots, and once I got back here it just made sense, Pete replied. What made sense? Sam added. Sai's situation. Think about it. A DOM evolves and adapts after every battle, no matter what the situation, right? So, just consider the implications of her injuries. If her soul was damaged, then what evolved? My soul? Sai replied. Exactly. It's the reason why your soul seemed to evolve to the point that it was the exact replica of your body. It's the perfect way of preventing what happened at the festival from ever happening again, Pete continued. Your powers are amazing. That's genius, Eve replied. I never thought about it that way. Sai nodded her head, agreeing with Pete's hypothesis. Okay, but enough distractions. Didn't we come here to tell Eve she was being an idiot? Sam cut in, with the delicacy of a bull in a china shop. Eve's eyes fell at the sound of his words, as if to be hiding embarrassment. Nice, Sam, Sai replied, putting her hand on her head. What? He replied obliviously. Look, I know you guys think this is about what she did to my sister, but... Eve replied, catching us all off guard. It's about the way she fights. Think about it. Every time we face these guys, they have the element of surprise. We've never seen any of them in action. And because these people have documented everything we've done, they have unlimited tape on us. All we have are some cruddy BAU images that are generally shown from the point of view of people in the midst of fights themselves. We finally have someone that we've seen. Someone we can prepare for. I'm telling you, I can beat her. Her words seemed sound, but over the past month, I was starting to understand her mannerisms. There was something that just didn't sit right with me, even if the things she was saying made sense. Okay, if you think so, I replied, still unsure. Yeah, we have to start trusting each other, right? Why not start with you? Sam added, raising his hand. I know you can beat her. Eve smiled at his words, giving him a high five. It sounds good to me, Pete replied. Everything you said is the absolute truth.
It'll be fun to have an actual game film to break down, not just hypotheticals and perceived mannerisms. It'll be fun." I nodded, acknowledging their words. "Well, let's get started," Eve added, grabbing her bag. "Sai and Tim, I'll need your abilities to train. Sam, you and Cadmiel have a similar fighting style, so I'll need you as well. Pete, you can help me strategize." "Sounds like a plan," Pete replied. "Let's do it." "You know I'm always down to fight," Sam replied. "I'll need the chance to get back in the swing of things anyways," Sai added. Eve batted her eyes at me, melting me like a popsicle. "Let's go," I sighed, lighting up my medallion. I shook my head as they all disappeared through their portal holes. I couldn't shake the solemn feeling that this wasn't going to end well. I looked at Beth's vacant expressions as she lay lifeless, yet she still showcased a solemn feel that seemed to foreshadow the upcoming storm. Like I had done since I first started on this journey, I sucked it up and did what was asked of me.